Imagine this. Dark clouds roll in over the circuit, the temperature drops, the first drops of rain hit the camera lens. And while half the grid quietly panics, one driver actually smiles inside the helmet. For most of the field, rain means chaos, risk, visibility problems, and career-ending mistakes waiting at every corner. For Lewis Hamilton, it means opportunity. Every time the sky opens up, he turns from one of the greats into something else entirely. A driver who seems to bend grip, traction, and physics to his will. That's why fans say the same thing over and over. When it rains, everyone is racing each other, and Lewis is racing the weather. Tonight, we're diving into why Hamilton becomes almost unstoppable in the wet, from his karting roots to legendary wet weather victories, and even how he's trying to drag a difficult Ferrari into relevance when the clouds arrive. And hey, if you love watching F1 drivers suffer while one guy looks like he's on a Sunday drive, hit that like button now. It feeds the algorithm the way intermediate tyres feed lap time. To understand why Hamilton is such a monster in the rain, you have to go back to where it all started. Lewis has talked about growing up driving in miserable British weather, karting in the wet on slick tyres, learning to feel every tiny movement of the rear end instead of fighting it. He said before that rain is when you have to rise to the toughest challenges, and that he sees wet races as a chance to make a difference with his driving, not just the car. When you grow up in conditions that punish mistakes and reward feel, you develop a kind of sixth sense for grip. That foundation followed him into Formula One. As early as 2008, in just his second season, he delivered one of the all-time wet masterpieces at Silverstone, destroying the field in torrential conditions and swinging the title momentum back in his favour. Years later, in 2020 at Istanbul, he would clinch a record-equalling 7th world title with another wet weather masterclass at the Turkish Grand Prix, going from 6th on the grid to a dominant win on a soaked, low-grip track that had others sliding all over the place. These weren't lucky races. They were the visible proof of thousands of laps of muscle memory built in the rain. Statistically, Hamilton's wet weather record is ridiculous. At one point, he held the record for the most consecutive wins in rain-affected races, 9 in a row between 2014 and 2018, more than even Michael Schumacher managed at his peak. That's not a fluke or a good car carrying him. That's a driver who, whenever the conditions get sketchy, finds a way not just to survive, but to dominate. While most drivers talk about staying cautious, Hamilton often says he gets excited when the rain starts coming in, because he knows the playing field is about to tilt in his favour. In 2025 sprint qualifying in Shanghai, when the drizzle arrived and others backed off, he lit up the stopwatch and put his Ferrari P2 on the grid in the wet. After the session, he admitted he'd been excited the moment he saw the rain clouds coming because he knew he could extract more than others. That mentality is insane, and it's a key part of why he's different. But it's not just mentality, there's hard technique behind the magic. Watch Hamilton's onboards in the wet and you'll notice 3 things. His steering is unbelievably smooth, his throttle application is gradual but confident, and his braking is a masterclass in trail braking. He almost never snaps the car into oversteer. He bleeds weight gently off the front axle and lets the car rotate, keeping the tyres right on the edge of grip rather than stepping over it. This is crucial on a wet track where every spike of input can mean a spin. Instead of making big corrections, he makes tiny, constant micro adjustments, like he's painting a line through the corner instead of wrestling the car around it. Analysts and fans have pointed out that in many wet races, Hamilton's car looks calmer than almost anyone else's, even when others are in the same machinery. That calm platform translates directly into tyre life and traction off the corners. Then comes his race IQ. In wet weather, strategy isn't just about picking the right compound, it's about timing the crossover between full wets, intermediates, and slicks. Hamilton and his engineers have nailed these calls over and over. In Turkey 2020, when others bolted on fresh intermediates, he stayed out, managing a worn set to the end and turning them into quasi-slicks while the track dried. That decision effectively won him the race and the championship in one move. It wasn't just bravery, it was feel, knowing the track was coming to him, trusting the car and trusting his own tyre management. In Britain 2008, he was one of the few drivers comfortable pushing deep into the braking zones without aquaplaning into oblivion. Time and time again, he's shown that in changing conditions, he understands not only where the grip is, but where it will be 5 laps later. Now here's the interesting part. The modern era hasn't made wet weather dominance easy for anyone. The 2020s ground effect cars are heavier, more sensitive, and create different spray profiles, making visibility awful. Even drivers who used to put a second a lap on the field in the rain now find themselves more constrained by tyres and aero wake. Yet Hamilton has still managed to stand out. Fans and pundits routinely place him in the top tier of wet weather drivers of all time, often bracketed with Verstappen as the best among the current generation. That means even as the machinery became harder to exploit, his skill ceiling stayed sky high. Of course, 2025 has given him a new challenge, the Ferrari. When Hamilton jumped to Ferrari, people expected romantic storylines, red car redemption arcs, and maybe a final title push. Instead, he's been handed one of the most unpredictable cars on the grid. In his early Ferrari outings, he admitted that in the rain, the SF25 behaved very different to what he'd experienced before, from the power unit delivery to steering systems and how the rear reacted. On some weekends like Qatar and Las Vegas, the car was so bad that rival Pierre Gasly literally told him, "Yo, you look so bad," after following the struggling Ferrari in the wet. In Vegas qualifying, Hamilton ended up last on outright pace in soaking conditions. The first time in his career he'd been at the back purely on speed, something he openly called horrible and admitted he was still processing. On paper, that sounds like the opposite of unstoppable in the rain. But here's where you have to zoom out and separate driver from machinery. Even while calling 2025 his worst season ever statistically, Hamilton has been clear he still feels confident in wet conditions. His worry is how the Ferrari responds, not whether he's forgotten how to drive in the rain. The car snaps unpredictably, loses traction out of nowhere, and can't keep tyres in the right window. When you put a Rainmaster in a rain-hating car, you don't see consistent wins. You see flashes of the old brilliance, like that Shanghai Sprint qualifying P2, buried inside a frustrating package. The scary question for the rest of the grid is this: what happens if Ferrari eventually fixes the car's wet weaknesses? If Hamilton ever gets a truly stable chassis in the rain again, the combination of his technique, experience, and mindset could bring back the kind of dominance we saw in the Mercedes era. Quick little reality check. And yes, this is the part where I remind you to subscribe. If you're still watching, you are 100% a hardcore F1 addict. So don't be like Ferrari promising upgrades next race and never delivering. Hit subscribe now. And tell me in the comments which Hamilton Wet Masterclass is your favourite. Silverstone 2008? Brazil, Turkey 2020, or something more recent? I'm reading them all. Let's go even deeper into what makes him so lethal once it starts raining. There's a psychological layer almost no one talks about. Many drivers tense up when conditions change. They get cautious, second-guess braking points, leave more margin. Hamilton seems to relax. You can hear it in old radio messages. He jokes, he asks for more info, he talks through grip levels calmly while others sound panicked. In wet Shanghai Sprint qualifying, while others complained about visibility and balance, he simply got on with it and delivered the lap. That psychological calm under low grip chaos is a huge advantage. It means he can push closer to the edge without emotionally tipping over it. Another underrated factor is how good he is at reading water on the track. In multiple wet races, you'll see him take unconventional lines, avoiding the usual rubbered-in areas that turn to ice, and instead searching for fresh tarmac where the tyres can bite. That's why onboard footage often shows him running slightly wider on entries or switching up lines mid-corner, while others stick rigidly to the racing line and lose control. Combined with his ability to manage brake temperatures and avoid locking up, it creates this illusion that he has more grip than everyone else, when in reality, he's just using what's there better. And we can't ignore the stats that still hang over his legacy. 7 world championships, many of them featuring pivotal wet weather moments that swung title momentum his way. Brazil 2008 in changing conditions, Britain 2008 in a monsoon, Germany 2019's wild race where he still dragged points out of chaos. Turkey 2020, sealing the 7th crown in conditions that made world-class drivers look ordinary. When the history books look at rain races that defined eras, Hamilton's name comes up again and again. So is he literally unstoppable in the rain today? In 2025? Not with this Ferrari. The cold reality is that no driver is immune to a bad car. When the SF25 is twitchy, unpredictable, and down on grip, even Hamilton looks human. But the deeper truth, the one this title is really about, is that the moment he's given machinery that behaves, he turns wet conditions into his personal playground. The instincts, the feel, the experience, the mentality, they are all still there. The reason he remains one of the most feared drivers when the forecast shows rain isn't because he's invincible, it's because everyone in the paddock knows that if circumstances line up even slightly in his favour, he can still pull out a race-defining masterclass. And that's the terrifying part for his rivals. They've already seen what he can do in equal machinery in the dry. They know his racecraft, they know his tyre management. Add rain to that equation, and suddenly all their little advantages from qualifying pace or straight line speed start to evaporate. Pun fully intended. So the next time you see dark clouds forming over an F1 circuit and the camera cuts to Lewis Hamilton on the driver's parade, pay attention to his face. If there's even the slightest smile, it might already be game over. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Hamilton's rain genius, don't go anywhere. Hit like if you think the FIA should schedule more wet races just for entertainment, subscribe for more F1 breakdowns, and drop your opinion in the comments. Is Hamilton still the true rainmaster, or has someone else taken that crown? I'll see you in the next one, where grip is low, stakes are high, and legends are made in the storm.